I've spent over 15 years as a game warden, and I've seen my share of strange things. You learn early on that the woods hold secrets. Some you stumble upon, others you wish you hadn't. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened deep in the forests of the Pacific Northwest one autumn evening. It began like any other patrol. For weeks, I'd been tracking signs of a poacher, someone brazen, ruthless, and meticulous. They weren't just hunting, they were slaughtering. I'd found snares, remnants of gutted animals, and trails that led to nowhere. This person was no amateur. They knew the land almost as well as I did, maybe better. The forest was unnervingly quiet that evening. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that turned the trees into looming sentinels. My radio crackled occasionally, but I preferred the silence. It helped me listen for footsteps, breaking twigs, anything out of place. That's when I saw it, the faint glow of a campfire, flickering through the trees. I crouched low, instinctively moving silently, my boots barely whispering against the forest floor. Fires were strictly prohibited in this area. But more than that, this deep in the woods, a fire meant trouble. As I drew closer, the smell of burning pine needles hit me first, sharp and acrid. But then came another smell, something raw and metallic. Blood. My gut twisted. I crept forward, my hand instinctively resting on the grip of my sidearm. The sight that greeted me made my breath hitch. A man, hunched over the fire, his camouflage jacket blending into the surroundings, was meticulously cutting into the carcass of a deer. Beside him, laid out on a dirty tarp, were other animals, a rabbit, a raccoon, and horrifyingly, a mountain lion. I'd seen poachers before, but this was different. This wasn't just hunting for sport or survival. This was carnage. "Hold it right there!" My voice rang out, louder than I intended, shattering the eerie silence. "Hands where I can see them." The man froze, but only for a second. Slowly he turned his head to look at me. I've met killers before, seen the cold, dead look in their eyes. But this was something else. His gaze was empty, almost inhuman. It felt like he was staring right through me, like I was just another animal in his sights. "Step away from the tarp," I ordered, my hand tightening on my holster. He didn't move. My instincts screamed at me to act, to call for backup, but something about the man, his stillness, his silence, rooted me to the spot. Then in one fluid motion, he lunged for the backpack at his feet. "Don't do it," I barked, drawing my weapon. But he didn't listen. Before I could react, he slung the pack over his shoulder and bolted into the trees, moving with an agility that didn't seem possible for someone his size. I hesitated, caught off guard by his speed. Then adrenaline kicked in, and I took off after him. The forest swallowed us both, the beam of my flashlight bouncing wildly as I ran. He was fast, impossibly so, darting between the trees like a shadow. My lungs burned, but I pushed on, driven by a mix of anger and fear. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the darkness. But he didn't, and then just like that, he was gone. I stopped, panting, my flashlight scanning the area. Nothing. No footprints, no rustling, no sign that anyone had been there at all. It was as if the forest had swallowed him whole. I stood there, the silence pressing in around me, my pulse thundering in my ears. Something wasn't right. I should have been able to track him. There should have been some sign, some clue. But there was nothing. I turned back, retracing my steps to the campfire, or at least I tried to. When I reached the spot where the fire had been, my stomach dropped. It was gone. No tarp, no animals, not even a scorch mark on the ground where the fire had burned. It was as if the entire scene had been wiped away. I radioed for backup, my voice shaking more than I'd like to admit. A team arrived at first light, and we combed the area, but we found nothing. No footprints, no remains, no signs of the man or his kills. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, those empty, predatory eyes staring back at me. Over the following weeks, the poaching signs stopped. No more snares, no more carcasses. It was as if the phantom poacher had vanished. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over, that somewhere, deep in the forest, he was still watching, waiting. Even now, when I patrol that area, I feel it. A heavy, oppressive presence that makes the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. I don't know who or what I encountered that night. But one thing is certain. The forest has its own rules, and not all of its inhabitants are bound by ours. The Haunted Cabin. The Wyoming plains are not for the faint-hearted. The vast, barren wilderness stretches endlessly, as if the world has been peeled back to reveal its raw, untouched soul. I wasn't new to isolation. Being a game warden meant solitude was part of the job. But the outpost I'd been assigned to was something else entirely. The cabin stood on the edge of a canyon so deep it seemed to swallow the horizon. The locals had warned me off, their eyes shadowed with unease. "That place ain't right," one grizzled rancher said, his voice low as though the cabin could hear him. "Folks don't last long out there." I dismissed their warnings as folklore, the kind of campfire tales used to scare children. I wasn't easily spooked, and the wilderness didn't scare me. But as I pulled up to the cabin that first night, headlights sweeping over the weathered wood and the leaning porch, I felt something I couldn't quite name. The place looked ancient, like it had grown out of the earth itself. The roof sagged under the weight of years, the windows dark and lifeless. As I unlocked the door, the air inside was damp and cold, the smell of mildew mingling with something faintly metallic. I chalked it up to neglect and got to work settling in. The first few hours passed uneventfully. I unpacked, lit the kerosene lamp, and scribbled notes about the wildlife I'd already spotted. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the canyon in blood-red hues, the cabin shifted. The wind howled through unseen cracks, and the temperature seemed to drop unnaturally fast. It wasn't just the cold that got under my skin. It was the silence. It pressed down on me, thick and oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards. I told myself it was just the wind. Old houses make noises, don't they? Then I heard it. A whisper, soft and fleeting, like breath against my ear. I froze, pen hovering over the page. "Who's there?" My voice sounded weak, swallowed by the cabin's hollow interior. No answer, just the wind. I laughed it off, uneasy but determined not to let my mind play tricks on me. I poured myself a coffee and tried to shake the feeling, but the whispers came back. This time, they were louder. They were coming from behind the heavy wooden door at the far end of the cabin. The door was an anomaly, nailed shut with thick, rusted spikes. The wood was scarred with scratches, deep, desperate gouges that looked like they'd been made by claws, or worse, fingers. I had noticed it earlier but dismissed it as a curiosity. Now, it loomed like a warning. As I stepped closer, the whispers grew more distinct. They weren't words, not exactly, but a guttural murmur, layered and overlapping, like dozens of voices speaking at once. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the rusted handle. "Just the wind," I muttered, as much to myself as to whatever might be behind that door. The moment I touched the handle, the whispers stopped. For one terrifying second, the cabin was silent. Then came the growl. It wasn't an animal sound, not something natural. It was low and resonant, vibrating in my chest, thick with malice. I stumbled back as the door shuddered violently, the nails bending outward as if something on the other side was trying to tear its way through. The kerosene lamp flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the door just as it burst open with a deafening crack. The stench hit me first. It was overwhelming, a mix of rot and damp earth, with an underlying sweetness that turned my stomach. The light caught movement, shadows shifting unnaturally, writhing like smoke, but denser. I could feel it. Whatever it was watching me. The air grew thick, heavy, pressing against my chest. "Get out!" I shouted, my voice cracking. The shadows coalesced, forming a shape, tall and angular, its edges sharp and wrong, like it didn't belong in this world. 2 pinpricks of light appeared where its eyes should have been, glowing faintly in the dark. It moved toward me, slow but deliberate, its presence filling the cabin. My flashlight flickered as I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the chair. "What do you want?" My voice was barely above a whisper, but the thing stopped. For a moment the whispers returned, swirling around me like a storm. I couldn't understand the words, but the intent was clear. It wanted me gone. I bolted for the door, adrenaline surging as I threw it open and ran into the night. The wind howled, biting at my skin, but I didn't stop. Behind me, the cabin loomed, dark and silent, as though nothing had happened. I spent the night in my truck, parked a good mile away. Sleep was out of the question, my mind racing with what I had seen, or thought I'd seen. The next morning, I returned with the sheriff and a few locals. The door was intact, the nails still rusted into place. The cabin smelled of damp wood and nothing more. They didn't believe me, of course. The sheriff patted me on the shoulder and told me to get some rest, while the rancher shook his head. "Told you that place ain't right." I quit the job a week later, but I've never been able to forget the whispers or the thing that stood behind that door. Sometimes, late at night, I dream of the cabin. The whispers call to me, louder and more distinct each time, and in the dreams, I open the door. The mysterious disappearance. The swamp has always been my sanctuary. I've worked as a game warden in Louisiana for over 20 years, and I know its twisting waterways, its suffocating thickets, and its deceptive beauty better than I know myself. The swamp doesn't forgive foolishness, but it rewards respect. At least that's what I used to believe. It began with the animals. Alligators and wild boars were turning up mutilated, drained of blood, their bodies contorted and arranged in strange, almost deliberate patterns. The local hunters were spooked. They whispered about hoodoo rituals and swamp creatures, their voices low, their eyes darting like they expected to see something lurking just beyond the tree line. I don't put stock in those stories. Superstition, I told myself. Animals die in odd ways all the time. Predators, parasites, disease. Nature isn't tidy. But something about these scenes was off. The precision of the wounds, the absolute absence of blood, it wasn't natural. The more I investigated, the more I found myself wandering deeper into the swamp, following a trail of unease. The first time I saw the symbols, I froze. They were carved into the bark of an old cypress tree, deep slashes that formed shapes I couldn't recognize. They weren't just random gouges, they were purposeful, ancient. I ran my fingers over the rough grooves, and for the first time in years, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the swamp's damp air. I pressed on. My job was to find answers, not get spooked by graffiti. But as the days passed, the swamp started to feel different. The air was heavier, the light dimmer, even during the brightest parts of the day. My compass, reliable as clockwork, started acting up. The needle spun lazily in circles, mocking me. I told myself it was a simple malfunction, but I felt it, a growing sense of being watched. I'd catch movement out of the corner of my eye, a shadow slipping between the trees, a ripple in the water where nothing should be. And then there were the lights. At first I thought they were fireflies, but they didn't behave like fireflies. These lights flickered in the distance, pale and cold, only to vanish when I got close. I radioed headquarters about the symbols, the lights, the compass, but it was just static and dismissive replies. Probably kids messing around, they said. Don't let it get to you. One evening I decided to follow the lights. The sun was setting, bleeding red and gold across the horizon, casting long shadows that twisted like living things. The lights were faint but steady, leading me deeper into the heart of the swamp. I lost track of time. The further I went, the harder it was to think. My flashlight's beam felt weak, swallowed by the swamp's darkness. I stepped carefully, the thick mud sucking at my boots, the drone of insects fading until there was nothing but silence. And then I found it. A clearing in the middle of the swamp, the trees bending inward like they were bowing to something unseen. In the center, a circle of those symbols had been carved into the mud, impossibly precise. At its heart was a pile of animal bones, bleached white and arranged in a spiral. My stomach turned, and my instincts screamed at me to leave. I reached for my radio. "HQ, this is Ray," I said, my voice trembling despite my efforts to sound calm. "I've got something strange here. You're going to want to send backup." The response was static. Then I heard it, a low, guttural sound, halfway between a growl and a moan, coming from the shadows just beyond the clearing. I swung my flashlight around, the beam cutting through the darkness. But there was nothing there. My heart was pounding as I backed away, keeping the light moving, expecting to see glowing eyes or a shape lurching toward me. The sound came again, closer this time, and I realized it wasn't coming from one direction. It was everywhere, surrounding me. I ran. I don't remember how long I ran or in which direction. My boots slipped in the muck, branches tore at my clothes, and the oppressive darkness closed in around me. I stumbled into the water, the cold shock snapping me out of my panic just long enough to orient myself. My boat wasn't far. I just needed to make it there. The lights appeared again. This time they were closer, hovering above the water, brighter than before. They didn't vanish when I approached. Instead, they seemed to pulse, drawing me in, despite every instinct screaming at me to turn away. I reached the boat and shoved off, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the engine. It sputtered, coughed, and died, the propeller choked with weeds. The lights were still there, hovering on the water like they were waiting for me to stop struggling. I grabbed my radio again. "HQ, I need help," I shouted. "Something's out here. The line went dead. The last thing I remember is the lights surrounding me, blindingly bright, and a sound like the swamp itself was groaning in pain. When I woke up, I was somewhere else. The swamp was silent, the air too still, the water black and featureless. My boat was gone. My flashlight, my compass, even my watch, all gone. The symbols were carved into the trees around me, glowing faintly in the darkness. I had no idea how I'd gotten there, or how long I'd been unconscious. My legs felt heavy, my mind foggy, like I was trapped in a dream I couldn't wake up from. I don't know how long I wandered, or if I ever truly left that clearing. I only know this: some places aren't meant to be understood. The swamp holds its secrets, and it doesn't let go of those who pry too deeply. If anyone finds this journal, leave this place. Don't look for me. Don't try to understand. Some mysteries are better left unsolved.